Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in the film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at Shane Haff NFL. And I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Jonny, how are you doing this evening?
I'm very well. Had a bit of a mental day, so we're a little bit later today. I will start off by saying happy birthday to my wife. It's her birthday today, and she's conveniently planned it this year slightly after the draft, because quite often we have a clash where the draft is on her birthday, and that is not fun. But this year, I managed to enjoy the draft in peace, no complaining about watching day three. It's been a rarity that I've watched day three on the Saturday, because normally I'm out trying to watch it on my phone. So I actually managed to follow it closely, and it was a really interesting draft. Really good one for the Eagles overall. I wasn't sure about it the whole time, as we'll get into, but I think when you take a step back and look over it, it's hard not to feel very positive about what the Eagles did.
Yeah, so Jonny is an absolute legend for podcasting, doing a draft recap on his wife's birthday, trying to get this one in before she gets home from work. So this is the rare episode where we say we might not go super long, and we probably won't, so Jonny doesn't get in trouble. We want him back on the podcast next week. Calling the podcast On the Shane just doesn't make any sense. We got to make sure Jonny sticks around. We've got a happy birthday wish coming in for Mrs. Page here from Fresh Prince of Delco on Twitter. So you guys that are watching live, be sure and keep those comments rolling. We're going to dive right in because we don't have a lot of time today, but we want to give you sort of a recap and a reaction to the Eagles draft class. And then we'll spend the next couple of weeks diving a little bit deeper into the film, going more in depth on these guys. So we've talked about Quinyon Mitchell quite a bit. We did a day one reaction podcast, but just to recap from the beginning, the Eagles stand pat at pick 22, and they took cornerback Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. He was the number 10 player on my big board, and he was number 11 on the consensus big board. I don't really have anything new to add on Mitchell. I haven't watched any more tape, and we talked about him quite a bit. But Jonny, is there anything that you want to add in on Mitchell, or should we just jump to players we have not yet talked about much?
Yeah, so two quick things, just a bit of housekeeping, I guess, to begin with. You mentioned it there. Whenever me and Shane, when we launched the podcast, we basically said we wanted to go really in depth. So we could, we're going to give you a generic Eagles rundown today, but we do actually spend time watching. Like, we are one of those people that will go back and watch all of the film. And there's a lot of UDFAs. There's a lot of players to watch. If you want to watch them properly, it's very hard to do it properly. So we are going to spend a bit of time on the draft. It does mean it'll be a little bit slower than some analysis. But if you really want to know these players inside out, we're going to try and go like pretty deep. So just stay around. We won't go into too much depth. I'm not going to lie to you and to say everything about Jadix Hunt, because I don't really know yet. I've watched very, very briefly and obviously read scouting reports like everyone else. All I would add is I did watch a little bit more of Quinyon Mitchell, partly because I felt like I needed to know him a little bit better. Secondly, because I needed a few clips for an article that I need to write for Bleeding Green, and I didn't find a lot of good stuff online. So I tried to find a few games I hadn't watched, and I tweeted a few of these clips out yesterday, if you follow me. The thing that I already knew, but I think it really, really came over to me, was how good he is at the catch point. I think sometimes we talk about cornerbacks and we talk about like the way they move, like the fluidity of their hips, their speed. And I think sometimes we don't do it with receivers, but with corners, we ignore like their timing at the catch point. And it really stood out to me how good he was at the catch point. Like there was a few clips that I tweeted out yesterday, and I called a couple of them like teach tape, where the way he makes contact with the receiver is exactly when the ball arrives. And not only that, but you can see him make contact exactly with the receiver's hand. And there's a brilliant clip, as I said, go look on my Twitter from yesterday. It's the first one I tweeted, where the video actually slows it down. So I haven't got to, which is nice. And you can really see the timing there. So I think the only thing that I would add that I saw from Quinyon Mitchell, I already knew about the athleticism. I already knew about the coverage ability. It was the way he played the football. That was the thing that really surprised me. And I know that his like pass breakup numbers are insane. But when you actually go and watch him a little bit more, you can really see it. Just as I'm talking, obviously, Shane, you've got the clip up here. And this is the one, if you look at what I mean, if you're watching on the video, the second the receiver makes contact with the ball, Quinyon Mitchell's there. And I think everyone knows the statistics by now, but 44 pass breakups in 2 years and 1 pass interference called. That is pretty freaky for a guy that, height, weight, speed prospect who can do that. So I felt really good. I already felt really good, but I watched him again and I felt even better. And I even went back and watched some senior ball reps, which I hadn't watched before. And he just looks so fluid. So that's my way of saying I'm not going to talk in depth about someone. That's about as brief as I can possibly be. But yeah, nothing really to add. Everything I thought from pod 1, but just the way he plays the football really impressed me the second time around, which is always good.
Yeah, and if you guys missed that day one reaction show and you're like, I can't believe they're already moving on from Quinyon Mitchell, we dropped about a 45-minute episode talking about Quinyon Mitchell right after day one. So go back in the feed and check that one out, and we'll get more into him when we get to the film. Last question here before we move on, coming in from YouTube from Quentin. Did we pick the right corner at 22? So I'll start. Quinyon Mitchell was my CB1. I think I said quarterback instead of cornerback, but whatever. He was my CB1 at 10 overall. I had Terrion Arnold 1 slot below him at 11. So Quinyon Mitchell would have been my pick. I would not have been upset if the Eagles took Terrion Arnold instead. I do think Quinyon Mitchell is just a little better fit for what the Eagles are going to want to do. But Jonny, your thoughts, Arnold versus Mitchell. Would you have taken Mitchell as well, or would you have preferred Arnold?
Yeah, it's a funny life, isn't it? I can't lie to you. My draft rankings are out there. I had them both as my only tier 1 cornerbacks. I put Arnold slightly ahead. I thought that Mitchell's film was better. The only reason why was the Alabama basically thing. Big school. I watched his interviews and I loved Arnold's interviews off the field. That was basically it. I thought Mitchell had the better film. But I thought Arnold, coming from Alabama, from a bigger school, and the way he interviewed, I think was a little safer. There's slightly more projection than Mitchell. But when you look at the athletic testing and you look at the traits, Mitchell was better. So obviously now I've watched the interviews and read the comments. I am Team Mitchell. I did have Arnold 1 slot higher, but they were both tier 1 cornerbacks. So I think the Eagles were extremely lucky to get either of them at 22 because I had them higher, as I know you did as well.
All right, so let's move on into the second round, where the Eagles took a guy that was widely mocked to them in the first round in cornerback, or defensive back, I guess I should say, Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. They traded up to 40 to get him. He was number 18 on my board. He was 21 overall on the consensus big board that's out there. I really like Cooper DeJean. Like going into the draft, this was the guy that I really wanted the Eagles to walk out of the first round with, because I didn't think that Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold would be there. And then they were. And that was wild to me, the way that corners just fell in this draft. But he was a first-team All-American as a defensive back and as a punt returner, surrendered 0 touchdowns in 2023. In 2022, he was the only cornerback that PFF gave an 85-plus grade in coverage and as a run defender. So he's a good run defender. He's good in coverage. I think Cooper DeJean is a tremendous, high IQ player. He has really good vision and route recognition, and he just reads and reacts to things, and he's always in the right spot. And that led people during the draft process to say they think maybe he's a safety. And, maybe there's an element of the fact that he's white, and there's not a lot of white cornerbacks in the NFL as well. There's also some stiffness in his hips, some of that short area burst. And so you throw all that in the hopper, and some people argued that he should be a safety instead of a cornerback. I had a first-round grade on Cooper DeJean. I said, I think he can be a corner or a safety, but if I'm drafting him, I would start him at cornerback. And then if it doesn't work out, I would move him to safety. But I truly think he could make an impact at any defensive back position. And so what were your thoughts on Cooper DeJean? I know we talked about him some, but kind of where did you have him in the scale? And what was your reaction to the Eagles getting him at 40?
Well, we predicted it. We might have said 22, but he was both of our predictions on the pre-draft pod. So I cannot believe he went to 40. I don't really understand how he went to 40 because no one has him there. He's like 20 on the consensus board or something, and he's extremely good. So I'm not really sure why. And the other thing that I find weird is even if you're not sure about him as an outside corner, you can still draft him earlier than that to play safety or play nickel. So I don't really get it. You said everything that I would said, really. He's basically a playmaker wherever he ends up. I don't really care where he plays. Extremely good athlete, albeit without the agility testing. He was on Feldman's Freaks list a few years ago. Incredibly good run defender, outstanding tackler on the open field, tested well, speed, explosive. Yes, he's a little stiff. Will he be an outside corner at the next level? I think he will. But to be honest, I don't care. Like, I don't really care where he plays. I think you can play him at nickel. I think you can play him at safety. I think you can play him outside corner. In fact, I would go as far as to say as I think that he is one of those rare players who, as long as he can learn the playbook, his versatility will be beneficial. Sometimes I think versatility is overrated because people say all these things. I'm like, that's all great, but where is he actually going to play? Like people talk about Nolan Smith. He's versatile. He could be an off-ball linebacker. I'm like, well, unless he can actually play there, then he's not really that versatile. Whereas I think Cooper DeJean genuinely can excel at all three positions. I think he might end up like a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, because I think he's so good around the line of scrimmage. I think he might be a nickel safety hybrid. I think you can essentially, in a perfect world, have like three safeties on the field who the other team doesn't really know who's playing nickel, who's playing deep safety. I think he can play some single high safety. I think he can play some split safety. I think he will be an outside cornerback. I just think he's a really, really good football player. Like, I don't really understand how he went to 40. You've seen the video of him playing basketball. You've seen the athleticism. He is just a great defensive back. I think if the Eagles linebackers are poor this year, you can stick him as like a big nickel back, and you can stick him as a linebacker in like a 5-2 front as well. Like, I think there's so many things you can do with him. He's got such good size, 6 foot, 203. Like, there's not really anything bad about this signing. That when people were like, oh, what if he's too stiff? I'm like, okay, stick him at safety. Like, you've got a very good safety, because I don't doubt he'll be good wherever he plays. But if the outside cornerback thing doesn't work, it doesn't even matter, because he can absolutely play other positions. So at pick 40, it's about as good as you'll get. Like, as I said to you before, every an analyst seemed to have him as a first-round pick. He was always mocked in the first round. He always went in the first round on like every mock draft. So to get him at 40, I don't really know what like Harry Roseman did to the other GMs. But they got very lucky. Like they got. I mean, they traded up for him. So fair play. And I think he would have gone, I think possibly the pick after. So fair play for them trading up for him. Also, I can't believe he fell that low. So yeah, I couldn't be happier. Like, absolutely buzzing. I was watching this obviously the morning after, and I could not believe it. We didn't even mention his name because we didn't think about them taking another defensive back on day 2, especially round 2. But when you have the chance to get the best player on the board and you still have need at that position, it was a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer. The Eagles got extremely lucky, and I'm incredibly excited to see the two of them play together.
Yeah, and Howie has such a good pulse on the market there, because they trade up and take Cooper DeJean. And it was either the next 3 or 4 consecutive picks were cornerbacks. And so he knew exactly where the cornerback run was going to start. I thought it was a perfect trade up, perfect player. And yeah, like Rob says here on YouTube, Howie does it again, take a bow. And Howie definitely deserves his flowers for the first 2 picks in this draft. I will say on the versatility thing, I love the versatility of Cooper DeJean, but it's worth mentioning that the Vic Fangio defense is a pretty complex defense. And so there is a learning curve. I do think it would be wise for the Eagles to find a role for DeJean early in his rookie season and not try to, oh, you're going to be in the slot here, and now you're going to be outside, and now you're going to be at safety. Like, I would like to see them put him at a place and let him learn that position well. And then by the end of the year, maybe you can flesh that out some more. But I can't help but think that having DeJean as the safety when they go into nickel and dropping Chauncey Gardner-Johnson into the slot is what I would be shooting for. I would be, although long-term, I want him to be the outside cornerback replacement for Darius Slay. That's where I think I would lean towards starting him as a rookie, is at safety in nickel to allow Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to drop down into the slot.
Yeah, I think I do the same. I think you're right. It is a complex defense, but I think there's enough similarity between sort of safety and nickel. You can see that as a hybrid. I think maybe this year do that, and then you reconsider your options next year, because Slay's going to start. I think Quinion Mitchell's going to start. So I think he's going to. I think you're going to find out that he's too good to stay on the bench for long. So I think he's going to carve out a role this year, because I think when he plays, he's going to look really good, and I think he's ready to play early. So yeah, maybe we'll get into it more detail once we've watched him a little bit more, where we think he will end up. But I can't quite believe they got him at 40 still. Just quickly, he was 23 on the consensus. He was 8 on PFF. So I mean, stats guys loved him, film guys loved him. I'm genuinely trying to find a reason for him to fall. I've not really read anything about why he fell. As you said, maybe it's just a white cornerback thing, but then that's also ridiculous because I think Tyler Nubin went in the 40s anyway. So people are taking safeties that high anyway. So I don't really understand it, but the Eagles got very lucky and they made the right decisions to trade up. And that's all I've already got to say about it right now. I still can't believe they got both of them.
Yeah. So thrilled with the first 2 picks. And then the enthusiasm dips a little bit as we get later on in the draft. At least it did for me. I was on the live draft show for Edge of Philly Sports. And when the Jalix Hunt pick came in at 94 overall, wasn't thrilled about it. But I was determined, I was like, Howie could have drafted a punter at the end of the 3rd round, and I would have been thrilled with how the first 2 days played out. But they take edge rusher Jalix Hunt out of Houston Christian at 94 after multiple trade backs. Adisa Isaac went off the board at 93, 1 spot ahead. So my initial thought was that maybe they were shooting for Isaac and they got a little too cute with the trade backs and they missed on their guy. But almost immediately it came out that this was one of Fangio's guys. And this wasn't like an hour later at a press conference when they had time to plant that. It came out pretty immediately. And so that does make me think this may be who they were targeting all along. Jalix Hunt had a 9.22 relative athletic score. He was a wide receiver in high school, went to Cornell as a safety, and then he transferred to Houston Christian University and became an edge rusher. I've seen some clips of Jalix Hunt. Haven't really got to, I don't know where I'm going to find footage of Jalix Hunt, but that's going to be a little hard to come by other than the clips on Twitter. But from what I've watched a little bit, he has terrific agility and speed, as you would expect from a wide receiver turned safety turned edge rusher. Per PFF, he had a 25.3% pressure rate on 3rd down last year. And so in pure pass rush situations, he just ran circles around guys. Literally, he didn't have a lot of pass rush moves that I saw. He just didn't need them. But he's a guy that I could see the Eagles using a lot on stunts where they can use his quickness to get inside. If they want to drop guys into coverage like they were doing last year with Hassan Reddick, he obviously would be a good fit for that with his speed and his background as a safety. So he should be better in coverage than maybe dropping Nolan Smith or a Josh Sweat or a not Bryce Huff. What's the edge rusher Huff we got? I'm going to keep doing this. No,
It was Bryce Huff.
It was Bryce Huff. Who did I keep saying?
Josh Huff.
Yeah, Josh Sweat. Whatever. I'm going to do that all year. You guys are just going to I'm just going to start saying Huff. But I could see him carving out he's probably going to be a big special teamer. I don't think he'll play a lot early, but when he does play, I could see him being a stunt man and a dropper in coverage.
Just quickly, do you know if he played on special teams? Have you read that anywhere?
I believe that he did. I can try to look it up here while you're talking.
Right. So while you talk, I'm going to give the people no analysis about Jalix Hunt because I have not watched him yet, except for what I've read. However, I'm going to give you analysis about he is not Davion Taylor. So I'm going to explain something. I hated the Davion Taylor pick, possibly more than any pick I've ever hated in my life. And if you go back through my Twitter, search my name and search Davion Taylor, you will know I hated it immediately. I hated his film. There is a difference. And I've seen people online compare the two. Now, I'm not saying I like this pick because I'll be honest, when it happened, I was a bit confused. And it does have a little bit of a Howie Roseman reaching for a freakish edge defender to it. But there's a big difference. He at least played edge last year. Now, he might have played other positions in his background, but last year he played edge. Now, whether he's ready to play edge, I don't know, but at least they watched him at edge. I was pretty deep in the Davion Taylor film. He did not play a proper position. his film was absolutely absurd. He was like an overhang defender. He was like chilling as like an edge linebacker, cornerback hybrid. Like I've got no idea what I was watching Shane when I was watching Davion Taylor. There were so many times I was watching him and his instincts were undraftable. Like I was watching the guy like he can't play football. And I felt really mean going after Davion Taylor because I rarely try and have like vendettas against players. And it just became like, I wrote a lot of film pieces about him for Bleeding Green. And I got, of course, when I'm negative, more comments pointing out that I'm wrong and he's going to be great. And I was like, listen, I like really hope he's really good. Like I hope he gets good in his future. But his college film it wasn't even bad. It just didn't make sense. It wasn't like what you want to see out of an edge or a linebacker. So I don't know if Jadix Hunt's going to be any good, but I would just say comparing him to Davion Taylor is a little bit unfair because Davion Taylor's film was unwatchable because it wasn't going to translate. As far as I'm aware, from what I've read and from what I've seen, Jadix Hunt is at least playing the position he's going to play at the next level. So you can at least evaluate him. And secondly, if you have the numbers, Davion Taylor did not play special teams, I'm pretty sure, at all. So he was an absolute no-go. I want a third round, obviously, to be better than just special teams. But the worst case scenario, at least you get a freaky athlete who can play special teams. Because Davion Taylor didn't do anything, basically. Do you know if you have special teams numbers?
I do. Jonny, we've podcasted long enough to know that you should know that in 2 minutes I can find any stats you need.
And did he play?
He did. So he played 383 special team snaps over the last 3 years at Houston Christian. And that wasn't like all this year. It was over 100 each of those 3 years. So he does have some experience on special teams. And we've got a comment here from Harrison says that you kind of doubt he'll see the field much this season. In defense, that's probably true. But if he can carve out a role on special teams, that gets you game day active and it maybe gets you a few reps here or there. So that's probably the hope for him in year one.
It's pretty incredible, but I'm reading back because I wrote a joint article about Davion Taylor and TJ Edwards, and I'm going to find some of my tweets while we're podcasting because some of them were pretty brutal on him. But basically, I said like it's pretty incredible when you watch both of their film that TJ Edwards went undrafted and Davion Taylor went in the third round. But then you look at their spider charts, and TJ Edwards basically had zero athleticism, no height, no weight, no bench press, no anything, and Davion Taylor's is brilliant. The problem is when you reach for athletic ability, when you have zero instincts, that is a massive problem. And Howie Roseman has been guilty of that in the past. However, I'm not going to tell you that Jadix Hunt is the same because I haven't watched him play the position yet. So come back to me in a week or two and I might be more negative. But for now, I hope anyway, he's learned his lesson with Taylor and he's not just going to draft a freakish athlete in the third round who can't play the position because Davion Taylor was the most frustrating guy I've ever watched on tape coming out of college. And I did not understand in the slightest how he was a third round pick. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to give you any analysis on Jadix Hunt because he was one of the players I did not watch. Funny enough, I watched the Eagles' fifth round pick, both of them, and their fourth round pick, but I didn't watch their third round pick. I even watched their sixth round pick this year. And it's funny that if Jadix Hunt had gone fifth round and Jeremiah Trotter had gone third round, I actually wouldn't have hated it that much. So it's funny how these things work out. But yeah, he would not be my first choice. But I think some of the Davion Taylor comparisons are a little bit harsh. And hopefully to the people I've explained why that is.
I have a tweet that is from a year later, but I said it's been a year and I still can't get over the waste of a third round pick that was Davion Taylor. He shouldn't have even been on a draft board pre-sixth round.
His draft film was horrendous, like genuinely. Like, and as I said, it wasn't even like he just didn't do anything. Like he didn't play. Oh, this is a good one. You'll like this. So this is during the season in 2020 when Davion Taylor wasn't playing. And I tweeted, I'm now really enjoying the quote, how can Davion Taylor not be worse than this takes? Seriously, his college tape is weird and abysmal. I've said all off-season repeatedly, he is not going to play a snap. He is not even close to ready. And then BLG replied to me saying, how can this player they drafted in the third be worse than what's on the field? And I replied, because he's not a linebacker, BLG. He is about as raw as they can possibly come. I mean, loads of people are tweeting me saying, no, he can't be worse. He can't be worse than what we had. He can't be worse than what we had. Why would they pick someone this raw? And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. The reason why he's not playing is because he was absolutely awful. And I think this is at the time when like Sean Bradley was playing in October and people were tweeting me like, how could he not be better than like, because Sean Bradley is a linebacker? Because I can't tell you this enough. Davian Taylor was not a real person. He didn't play a position. And I feel really bad because I just went for him. But like he did not play a position. Whereas I am hoping that at least Jadix Hunt is not in that category.
Yeah. Comment coming in from John here on YouTube. He says, at the end of the day, I was happy with the overall draft, especially since we recouped a future 3rd, 4th, and 5th, but I was hoping for Zach Zinter or Roman Wilson at 78. And so with that comment, let's transition into day 3, and we'll talk about the selections that the Eagles made there. First up at 127, they took running back Will Shipley from Clemson. He was ranked 128 on the consensus big board. So that's about where consensus had him. Shipley is a good pass catcher out of the backfield. He's got a 9.58 relative athletic score. He had 40 plus targets out of the backfield each of the last 2 seasons. That said, he's not a good pass blocker. Now, I do think that he tries, which is important, I guess, because we've seen running backs that have no interest in pass blocking, but he just fundamentally doesn't have the strength to pass block. I thought he has fairly smooth movement skills. He's okay as like a zone runner, which is what the Eagles primarily run. He ran for 1,182 yards and 15 touchdowns in 2022, but he and really the whole Clemson team had a down year in 2023. The Shipley pick, to me, it felt like rather than getting a different archetype of back from Saquon Barkley, going and getting like a big bruiser that can just get you a couple yards downhill or something like that, it felt like they just wanted to get someone that in a big pinch where Saquon gets hurt, it's like, okay, we could throw this guy out there on all 3 downs. And I wouldn't love it. I didn't love necessarily the value here, but you draft a running back on day 3. I guess I'm fine with it overall. What were your thoughts on Shipley?
Yeah, I'm shocked he's got a 9.58 RAS score because I didn't see it on film. Like, again, full disclosure, the benefit of putting out rankings before is everyone knows that you're lying if you say anything different. So I watched, 11 running backs or so? Yeah, I watched about 11, and he was my last guy. Now, before everyone panics, I only watched like the top 100 picks. So I had him in like the 4th or the 5th round. So it's hardly a giant reach. I had him in rounds 4 to 5. But there's other guys that are taking swing on. But again, it depends what you want. Like I would have gone after a Tyrone Tracy type guy who I basically think, or an Isaac Garendo, who would basically upside swing for the fences. And that's normally how he does on day 3. This is the safe guy. This is a very professional, very solid not starting running back, but running back. Like I compared him as like a Zamir White, like a good receiver, good short area, produced for 3 straight years at Clemson. Clemson's not a joke. If you produce for 3 straight years at Clemson, you can play. 5'11", 206, good zone runner, decent contact balance, decent power. Like I described him as a jack of all trades, master of none, which I think we spoke about that being an American phrase. So it's not one of my UK bingo ones. I basically said he's a good receiving backup running back with a good feel for zone runs, but no real elite traits despite good production. And the issues I have is that he fumbles a lot and his pass protection's poor and he's not particularly explosive. Now, me personally, what I want philosophically is when Saquon Barkley's on the bench, which is going to be rare, hopefully, I want someone like Tyrone Tracy or Garendo who can come in for 5 snaps and maybe take one to the house. The Eagles seem to want more of a player who can play if Saquon Barkley is not there. And in that sense, I think it's sensible. I don't think he's as good as Kenny Gainwell for what it's worth. So I think if Barkley goes down next year, I think Gainwell will get some love. I expect him to play. But the Eagles obviously wanted a professional back. And some teams draft like this. Some teams, like the Dolphins, just draft the fast, explosive guy. And some teams want the professional guy who can sort of do it all, but nothing great. I don't sound like a Boston Scott style, but I mean, is he significantly better? Maybe. I didn't love the pick, and the fumbles and the pass protection are a slight concern. However, the Eagles got a really good offensive line, and they run a lot of outside zone. Next year, they probably will, and they run a lot of inside zone, and they run a lot of zone read, and I think he can do all that. So do you know what? People will be laughing at us for our rankings because if he does start a few games next year, he'll produce because the offensive line is good, and he can run. He's not a bad player. Just for me personally, 4th round pick, I would have gone for something a little more explosive. The Eagles obviously went with the safer pick. It wouldn't have been my choice. And at this point, after the Hunt and Shipley pick, I was a little bit like, yeah, it wasn't exactly what I wanted from the third and fourth round, because I think they're not relatively premium picks, but they are decent value. To answer this question, no, I don't expect him to play that much. I think they're giving Barkley, and they're going to run Barkley into the ground the next 2 years. I think he may do if Barkley gets hurt. But I think the thing about Kellen Moore's offense is I watched him a lot, and I'm telling you now, if you want to play on third down, you've got to be able to pass protect. So I don't care how good they think Shipley is at the backfield. I don't care. I think Nick Sirianni seemed quite involved in this pick when you heard him talking on the phone in the post-game interviews. He seemed to really like the guy. I don't care how much Sirianni likes him or Roseman likes him. The way Kellen Moore plays offense is if it looks like you're bringing pressure, someone's staying into block. And I think it with a running back more times than not. So he will not see the field unless he sorts out his pass protection. Until he does that, I think he might be one of those backs who is just a slightly annoying pick. But yeah, I don't dislike the guy. I think he's a good player overall. Just, again, me personally, I wanted explosiveness. And I don't really think he provides that. Finally, Shane, there was a good tweet from somebody who I can't remember. This sort of sums up Shipley, who said, I've watched his YouTube highlights, not grinding the film, just watching casually, and they're quite boring. And I've not watched Will Shipley's highlights, but you know what? It wouldn't shock me, because that's sort of like what I feel like. If you go and watch anyone's YouTube highlight, it's like fantastic run after fantastic run after fantastic run. And I think the guy who watched Shipley's highlights was a bit just like, oh, yeah, he's fine. And you expect highlight reels to be like amazing. I'm going to go back and watch him now. I did watch him quite a lot, but I will go back and watch him and see if maybe I can see a little bit more juice. Because the athletic testing suggests he's better than I think he is athletically. I didn't really see it, but there we go. That was just me.
I'm almost positive that I saw a stat somewhere that in his career, he only has one run of over 50 yards.
I think I've heard that as well. And I think I've heard the similar thing. And that is, for me, the opposite. Whereas you get someone like a Garendo, who is nowhere near as good of a running back. Isaac Garendo could be far worse. He's got 231 carries and he's nearly 24. So don't get me wrong. I know that Will Shipley is a better player than Garendo. And then you've got Tyrone Tracy, who is a former receiver, who has only played 1 year at running back. Once again, could be far worse. But I think if you're talking about minimal touches, you want someone more explosive. But I think this maybe signals to everyone that the Eagles are slightly worried about Barkley's health. And if Barkley goes down, Shipley and Gainwell could handle the load and it's not going to be a disaster. Whereas Garendo could be a disaster. Like, he might not know where he's running, his vision. Shipley is a professional running back. I think that's all he is. He's fine. He's just a guy. And you can do worse in the fourth round.
Yeah, likely your running back 3 headed into the year, not your running back 2. And that's totally fine for a day 3 pick. So let's keep it rolling here. Let's go to pick 152 in the 5th round, where the Eagles selected Anias Smith, wide receiver / running back / return man out of Texas A&M. He was actually 152 on the consensus big board too. So they took him at the exact slot that he was projected to go. He is 5'9", 190 pounds. If you look at his spider chart, it's hilarious. Everything is just stacked on top of each other in the middle, like 0th percentile, 8th percentile, 5th percentile. And then he has a 92nd percentile bench press. So the guy likes arm day. He likes chest day in the weight room, apparently. He played both running back and wide receiver at Texas A&M. And his relative athletic score is not great, 7.36. But I would say he's a sudden mover who has smooth cuts. He's like, I would describe him as like a jitterbug. He doesn't have elite long speed. He ran a 4.45. He doesn't necessarily like cut super quickly when he's at full speed, but like the head fakes and the way he runs. And it sort of reminds me of like Tavon Austin was faster, but throwing back to like college and watching Tavon Austin run wild on OU several years, a lot of years ago, that sort of running style where he's just always bobbing and you can't square this guy up. And he's got good hands. He had the 3rd lowest drop rate of any draft eligible receiver this year. He's a slot only guy. 59 of his 80 targets came from the slot. But he forced 20 missed tackles this last season, which was 7th most among wide receivers. I think, long-term, you would love for this to develop into your wide receiver 3, but he's not the archetype the Eagles have traditionally liked, the Quez Watkins, the elite deep speed. He's more of like a we're going to scheme up touches for this guy, or jet motion. And Johnny's bobbing his head because we've talked about this with Kellen Moore. This is the if Jalix Hunt was the Vic Fangio pick, I firmly believe Anais Smith was the Kellen Moore pick. And by the way, he might also be your return man with the new return rules.
Yeah, you love it when you feel like you know exactly what the Eagles want and you get it right. So I'm going to say something incredibly annoying, and we need to be a little bit quicker because I say I'm not going to go in depth for them. We want to save something when we actually break these players down. But I started watching him, and I kid you not, this is true, and I can't prove it's true because I deleted him. And then because I had so many players to watch and it was getting late in the day, I looked at his consensus. I said, he's not a top 100 guy. I'll get back to him later. And I wrote on my spreadsheet, I put, this is an Eagles day 3 target all over. Watch him. Guess what I did? Didn't go back and watch him. Before I shared the spreadsheet with everyone online, I deleted his name. So I can't prove it because my spreadsheet is the same as everyone else's now. I didn't save a copy. It's just the one online. And I 100%, this is the Eagles day 3 guy. Like, I nailed it. And I didn't mention him in any podcast because we didn't talk day 3 much. And I knew he was a possibility. He is the anti-Will Shipley. He looks very, very explosive and didn't test well. There's a few things about him I'll get into very quickly, and then we'll watch him in more depth, and I'm excited to watch him in more depth. He'll be a good podcast. Firstly, he fits exactly what Kellen Moore wants, like to a T. As I said, I was punching the air because I've said this since day one. I've watched a lot of Kellen Moore. Jet sweeps, manufactured touches is what he needed. Paris Campbell was the other guy who can do that. Paris Campbell is 5'11", basically 6 foot, 205 pounds. Smith is not. Like, quite simply, he's not. He is slot only. Paris Campbell is versatile. That makes a big difference because AJ Brown likes to go to the slot. Devontae Smith likes to go to the slot. So quite simply, you're not going to start for the Eagles if you can't move around. So I don't think Smith's ever going to be a starter. I don't think he's going to be wide receiver 3. I think he's going to be wide receiver 4 or 5. But he can do things in minimal touches, which is 100% what this offense needs because no wide receiver 4 on this team is ever getting targets because AJ Brown's getting 10 a game. Devontae Smith's getting 8+ a game. Dallas Goedert's getting 6+ a game. Saquon Barkley's getting 6+ a game. Oh, and they're going to run the ball a lot. So they do not need a volume receiver. So someone who can run a bubble screen on a read option play and do nothing else in his rookie year except return is perfect for me. So this was the exact guy I wanted them to target. If you're a fantasy guy, ignore him. He's not going to put up numbers, but he'll be a very useful real-life player. And also, if Paris Campbell gets injured, he can play a little bit more. So I love this pick. I'm a little bit disappointed he didn't test as well as he looks on film, but to be honest, that's probably why he went in the 5th round. Whereas a guy like Malachi Corley, who is a similar skill set but bigger and tested off the charts, ends up going higher than even I thought he would. So this was not the name I mentioned, but I can't prove it. But I'm telling you, he was a guy that I knew the Eagles were going to target, and I wish I'd kept him on my spreadsheet because I could prove it, but I can't. So yeah.
All right. Well, let's keep rolling here. 155, the Eagles they made the legacy pick. They brought the Axeman home, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., linebacker out of Clemson. He was number 73 on my big board. He was 105 on the consensus big board, and he went at 155 to the Eagles. And I have a clip I have to show of Trotter that I tweeted about back in February, just talking about what a good blitzer he was. So he had 28 pressures and 5.5 sacks on 102 pass rush reps in 2023. So that's tremendous pressure rate. But this particular rep, it came against Notre Dame, and he blitzes through the B gap. And the running back has him squared up from the beginning, and he just makes him miss, makes him totally whiff, and notches the sack. And that was the play where I fell in love with Jeremiah Trotter Jr. And he's got his limitations, of course, for a guy that's dropping down to the 5th round. I do not think you could play him next to Nakobe Dean. I just don't think you can do that in terms of their physical profiles and things. He did not have a relative athletic score because of lack of testing, but he's undersized and he misses a lot of tackles, 16.3% missed tackle rate, but he's got good speed and athleticism, not great, I would say. I think he reads routes pretty well, but at his best, this is a guy that you want to blitz. And, we talked about in our Vic Fangio episode that Vic Fangio often likes to bring like these fire zone blitzes, but then drop one of his ends out. So he'll bring a linebacker, drop an end, the thing that Eagles fans hated last year. But this time it's actually with a plan because we're rushing 4, but we're trying to generate a free rusher on one side with a linebacker. A Jeremiah Trotter Jr. would be great with that. Nakobe Dean would be great with that too if he could stay healthy. Maybe between these two guys, you can end up with one healthy linebacker to play next to Devin White and see how it goes. But what were your thoughts on the Jeremiah Trotter Jr. pick?
I love this pick. I think I'm higher on this pick than like most Eagles fans. This basically saved day 3 for me. Like, if they had taken him at 4th round, Will Shipley in 5th round, everything's great. Like, basically, people keep saying, why did Trotter fall? Why did no one like him? I don't think people didn't like him. I think teams, and we hear this all the time from agents and coaches, they have limits, or what's the word? They have a criteria for drafting somebody. And I think a lot of teams will say, we're not touching a linebacker below 235. And Trotter just won't be on their board. Like, I don't think it matters if he's 6th round. I think there are a lot of teams, we always hear from teams, when they say, like, how big's your board? They always say it's far smaller than you think, because different teams have different thresholds or criteria. There is no way Trotter's film is a 5th round film. No way. He's fallen because of his size. The thing is, the film's good. Like, I care a lot more about instincts for athleticism at linebacker. I think you can have one athlete, but Devin White, who has got better, I don't care if he runs around very quickly. If he reads everything wrong at times, it doesn't really interest me. Like, look at who this guy's dad is. You know he's got football in his blood. He's been brought up as a linebacker. His speed's good enough. His athleticism, I think, is good enough. He can run side to sideline. He's got instincts in zone. He just knows how to play the position. He can blitz. He's physical. Yes, he has problems. He will always struggle as a stack linebacker. Always. He will struggle to take linemen on at the point of attack. He will struggle when teams run power at him. He is small, and it shows. But I think he can be a starter. Like, I genuinely do. I think he can start. I think eventually, I think the problem is him and, as you mentioned, Nakobe Dean are too small. But I think basically you've got your Nakobe Dean backup. And I think if Dean doesn't work out, he could play in the Eagles 5-2 front where he's kept clean. He could play behind Jordan Davis. If the worst comes to the worst, I think he could play right away. Like, he doesn't have the length, the size, and the explosiveness that you really need. But I think he can play in this league. Like, I watched TJ Edwards, and I really liked TJ Edwards early on. I was on the TJ Edwards hype train. Go and look again. I tweet everything and I write everything, so I can't lie to you guys on here. I like TJ Edwards immediately because he's a really smart football player. He gets it, and he's instinctive, and he's made a really good career for himself. So I think Trotter fell because of his size, not because of his film. I know, like, Greg Cosell's higher than me on him, but I mean, he said his film's the best linebacker film in this class. Like, I wouldn't go that far. But you've got someone like Cosell, who I know worked with Trotter's dad, if we're being honest, with the Eagles, but still, he doesn't just write nonsense online. Like, he watches a lot of film, and the film is good. So to get Trotter in the 5th round, I think how we got incredibly lucky, because I think this year a linebacker was looking like a disaster position again, because all it took for was Nakobe Dean. You had me tweeting like Ben Van Sumer and emojis to get people excited for your linebacker free, and Trotter brings a safety net. And now I think the Eagles have got 2 starting linebackers, and they got 2 backups that I feel at least a little bit more secure about. I think this pick for me, and maybe I'm higher on him than others, it sort of saved day 3 for me. Because when I saw this in the 5th, I thought you've got a hopefully productive backup / average starter. And for 5th round, for a guy that we all wanted on the team, I think that is a massive win. So I think how we got lucky, because he should have gone earlier. And I think when we get into his film and we actually break him down a bit more in depth, I think people are going to realize that actually the film is pretty good. The film is pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you. I couldn't believe that he continued to fall, and that the Eagles, who have the connection, who desperately need linebacker, continued to take other players and not go get Trotter. So, we'll get into the film with him a little bit later. Let's round it out here with these last 3 picks. At 172, the Eagles selected offensive guard Trevor Keegan out of the University of Michigan. He had a 9.19 relative athletic score. He is 6'5" and 3/8, 310 pounds. Pretty good mover. He was a 36-game starter at left guard for Michigan. He allowed 13 pressures on 936 pass rush plays, which is a 1.4% pressure rate allowed. He also had 1,174 rundowns with only 16 snaps of blown assignments, which is a 1.4% blown block rate. Looking at Keegan, I have like a 1 bullet point on Keegan. It's that he lacks power and body density, but he's a savvy guy, a high IQ player who's just technically sound. Like, not a high floor, not a high ceiling, I don't think, but he's a guy that just at least knows what he's supposed to be doing, even though there's some size and power limitations there. He's probably just a backup interior offensive lineman. Like, the Eagles did not address offensive line at all on day 1 and 2, which really surprised me. I think that tells you Tyler Steen's going to be your starting right guard, but I wouldn't be surprised if Keegan gets reps at right guard and they try to develop that versatility and sort of have a backup all along the offensive line.
Yeah, and I mean, they've obviously added Mekhi Becton afterwards, so there's your swing tackle as well. I think the ball just didn't fall to them particularly kindly. One of my 1,000 predictions in our day 1 instant reaction show was that the Eagles would go defense on day 2. So I got that right. If you ignore that was my second prediction and my first prediction was wrong. So if we take the second one, I got it right. Yeah, I haven't watched him. I don't know much about him. Everything I read seems good. It seems like he was a bit decent to fall down there. I think backup wise, you can probably combine the 2 offensive linemen together, to be honest, Shane, if you want to bring Dylan McMahon up on the board. I've not watched either of them either, but they swing for athletes. I mean, this is the guy I'm a little bit more interested about because his athleticism is off the charts in terms of broad jump and vertical jump, which tells me he's explosive. And a 9.88 score in the shuttle is really important. I think Josh Norris talks about the shuttle for offensive linemen being a big deal. And I believe this is one of the guys the Eagles drafted who fits the bill athletically. At the end of the day, we've said this about Jeff Stoughton in previously. One of the best things about having the best offensive line coach in the world is you shouldn't need to take high picks every time. Like, when you look at the Eagles offensive linemen currently, you've got Lane Johnson, 4th overall pick. Next to Tyler Steen, 3rd round pick. Next to Cam Jurgens, 2nd round pick. Cam Jurgens?
2nd, yes.
Landon Dickerson, 2nd round pick. Jordan Mailata, obviously freak case. But you should be able to get some offensive linemen later in the draft. I view offensive linemen as a unit rather than individuals, and you don't want any real weaknesses. If you can develop one of these 2 into a decent backup, they've got the athleticism to start eventually, then perfectly fine. So I have 0 problems with either of them. And actually, I think I'm quite glad they didn't take offensive line early, although I sort of talked myself into it because, as I mentioned before, one of the things about having the best coach is that you shouldn't have to necessarily go after the best players every year, because the idea is you can obviously build them up. So yeah, both offensive linemen, I haven't watched them yet, so I've only read stuff that you've all read online. I will watch them eventually and maybe we'll have some more thoughts, but as of late, you can't complain. Two athletic offensive linemen on day 3. You will never ever hear me complain about that.
Yeah, so Dylan McMahon has the fastest short shuttle of any interior offensive lineman in the last 10 years. And only 2 guys have had a faster 3-cone. And one of those guys was Cam Jurgens. So the Eagles they have a type on the interior there. He also has played everywhere on the interior. In the last 3 years, he's played 606 snaps at left guard, 980 snaps at center, and 728 at right guard. So tremendously short arms and wingspan, but he does have that versatility across the interior. So as we transition to the Eagles' second to last draft pick, the last guy that we'll talk about here, I do have an announcement I have to make, Jonny, and that is we have topped 1,000 live viewers for the first time since we started live streaming. So those of you guys that are watching, you guys are incredible, absolute legends for having 1,000 live viewers during the middle of a work day. Appreciate you guys. Don't get yourselves in trouble at work here. But let's talk a little bit of Johnny Wilson and we'll get out of here. So this is a pick I was actually really excited about. Johnny Wilson is 6'6", 231 pounds. He ran a 4.52 40, which in terms of like speed, that's not, insane speed, but at 6'6", 231, that's incredible speed. This guy is huge. He's fast for his size. And when I'm looking at guys that I want to take on day 3, this is what I want to do. I want to take the Dylan McMahon that's an athletic freak. I want to take the Johnny Wilson that is ridiculously tall and large and can run, up there with guys he's got 30 pounds on. Now, Johnny Wilson has a lot of drops on his film. He is not the best separator, but that rare size and wingspan with good movement skills makes me excited he's on the roster. I've heard a lot of talk about him being like a hybrid tight end. I don't think so. I think he's probably just going to be a receiver, and he's got a lot of work to do. But with a 6th-round pick, this is the exact kind of guy that I want you to go draft.
Yeah, I'll be honest, Howie's getting a lot of credit of late, and I think rightly so. I don't understand where some of these guys went, Shane. Like, I don't know if NFL GMs are just getting worse. Like, my friend's a Jags fan. I look at the Jags draft, and they're just taking guys on the consensus board. They're like 400 in the 5th round. Like, why is he available in the 6th round? What am I missing? Is he brilliant? No, of course he's not. He went in the 6th round. But I had him as like a 3rd, 4th round grade. I mean, he's 6'6", 231, and he can run. Catching is an issue. Like, granted, catching is a problem. And if you've got a receiver who doesn't catch particularly well, fair enough, slight issue. But you know what? You can coach people that. You can't coach someone to be 6'6", 231 and actually run. Like, he's not a tight end. Like, he can actually move. Like, he can get off press. He's not just a straight line athlete. He can win the short intermediate game. I could imagine him excelling on like a deep dig type thing when you're running dagger. Like, I think he can give AJ Brown a couple of snaps off. Like, I think he makes a roster for a 6th round pick. Hurts throws a brilliant outside of numbers deep ball. So why the hell not? Like, this is like a swing for the fences. That what's the downside here? I don't understand how he was available at 185 overall. I'm pretty sure basically nobody had him at 185 in their boards in consensus. I don't know where he was, but I know he would have been higher than 185. So yeah, what can you say? Sometimes like general managers are good. Sometimes I feel like they get lucky, and I feel like Howie had the Gene pick, the Johnny Wilson pick, and the Trotter pick, just like, oh, that was easy. Just take them because they were clearly higher than they should be.
Yeah, he was 102 on my big board. He was 117 on the consensus big board.
Yeah, and you went 185. Like, that's absurd. Yeah. And the thing is, the Eagles normally draft pretty good character guys as well of late. So it's not like it's like Jermaine Burton where you know there's a problem. I don't believe there was any issues character-wise with Wilson or Trotter that we've read about. So it's just a bit weird. Like, I feel like how we got very lucky with a couple of these picks, but we are not complaining as Eagles fans in the slightest.
And he is 2.5 inches taller than George Kittle and runs the same 40 time. So just a little comp there. Not saying he's George Kittle. Don't click that.
Here first. Yeah, everyone get the tweets ready. Shane Huff. Johnny Wilson is bigger and better than George Kittle.
You know, I'm just going to clip out the part where you said my name.
I said it.
Just brilliant. You saying that and tweet that out now. So I'm actually going to do that when we get done here. So in addition to the draft picks, the Eagles entered the draft with 8 picks. They added 9 players, 2 of which were top 18 prospects for me. They also picked up the Dolphins 3rd round, Lions 4th round, and Texans 5th round picks next year. So restocked the cupboards there a little bit. Last thing I'll throw up here, and then we'll get out of here so Johnny doesn't get in trouble. I found this on Twitter. This was compiled by someone, Renee Bunger at RNBWCV on Twitter. I'm not sure. I probably butchered that pronunciation, but compiled aggregated draft rankings across 29 different writers and weighted it out. And the lowest grade that the Eagles received from any of these writers was an A+. On average, they had the highest scores across the 29 writers. So it's not just us. We're not just homering for the Eagles draft here. League-wide consensus seems to be that Howie did it once again.
And it's also awesome to see the 49ers, Washington Commanders, Dallas Cowboys right at the bottom. Although sometimes I have problems with draft grades because anyone who gave the Atlanta Falcons an A needs to stop giving draft grades because no, that was the worst pick I've ever seen in the first round of all time. But yeah, I take it you're going to give final thoughts, Shane. So I'll give mine unless there's anything else you desperately wanted to add. But that is pretty cool, isn't it? When you see that ranking on the big screen, like that is pretty awesome. But how could you not? Like, it's what I keep saying. Like, draft's a funny thing, man. Cuba DeJean at 40 doesn't make sense to me in the slightest. Jeremiah Trotter at 155 doesn't make sense to me, and Johnny Wilson doesn't make sense to me. But the Eagles were very lucky, I think, in some ways to get some of those players. But there you go.
All right. So yeah, we need to have a show where we talk about the rest of the NFC East draft grades at some point, or their draft classes at some point.
We really do.
Road,
I've got stuff to say on the Cowboys. I've got stuff to say. Sorry, Shane. I meant to add this as well. So before you wrap it up, the one final thing I was going to add was I tweeted this out, and I knew it would do a few numbers because it was that kind of tweet that second in RAS scores, 5th best on the consensus big board, 3rd in production. So in very, very simple terms, and it sounds so sensible when you put out this, doesn't it? The Eagles drafted elite athletes who produced at a high level and fell lower than expected. Whatever you think of the individual players or the draft, that as a strategy, if you could tell me now for the next 50 years of my life, the Eagles are going to draft elite athletes who produce well and fall below consensus, I would say I will take that strategy every single year. Because whatever you think of individuals, the draft's a little bit lucky. It's a little bit of a crapshoot. If you hit all those 3 boxes, then I think you're basically laughing at other general managers who still think they're better than the consensus, who think they know better for athletic testing. And I think some of what Howie does is just really sensible. And I think the last few years, he's been so good at just making the basic moves that anyone, if they looked at the consensus board and the testing, would have probably made as well. So I'm not trying to discredit him because I think he did an exceptionally good job. But I think he also got some very lucky picks where other general managers are going to be shaking their heads in a few years, wondering like, why the hell did we not pick Cooper DeJean before the 40th pick, for example? So yeah, when you put it that way, what can you say? Fast guys who produce are athletes. Like, what more do you want?
It's a winning formula for sure. So thank you guys for joining us for this episode of On the Shane Page. First time breaking 1,000 live viewers. It's awesome. If you guys are just watching live, we do put this out on podcasting platforms, and you guys can go check out On the Shane Page wherever you stream your podcasts. 5-star rating and reviews are greatly appreciated. Our most recent review on iTunes is from Nickel Pickle. Says, this podcast goes in depth of everything Eagles. I love the passion, logic, and reasoning expressed by both Jonny and Shane. It's awesome to have you both back. And it is awesome to be back and to have your guys' support. So we appreciate that. We've got some cool stuff in the hopper that we're working on and I know we've said that for a week or two, but draft season's crazy. I'm still finishing up remodel stuff that I've been putting off because of draft season. So it's going to trickle out, but we're excited about some of the things we have going. So you guys keep it tuned in here. And otherwise, we will catch you guys next week. We'll start going into these prospects a little bit more in depth. So between now and then, enjoy the glow of being the top ranked draft across consensus. We'll catch you guys next week.